Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a tale where fortune meets shadow, and the sharp click of polished shoes echoes through alleys lined with red lanterns. We're in San Francisco, Chinatown to be exact, where the streets smell of roast duck, incense, and ambition. Neon signs flicker above quiet tea shops. Old men huddle over zhangqi boards. And Peter Chong? He walks through all of it like a man born to lead in silence. You probably won't survive this, not in his world. Not unless you know which alley not to enter, which silence not to trust, and which smile means step closer versus step off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night he first stepped into Chinatown's underworld wasn't a stormy cinematic cliché. It was mild, foggy, the kind of night San Francisco quietly wears like a shawl. Peter's silhouette drifted past parked delivery vans, past noodle shops that had just locked up, and past temple doors left cracked for restless spirits. At a glance, he looked like a man who worked in finance. Tailored charcoal suit, silver-rimmed glasses, hands free of calluses. But Chinatown knows its own, and it knew Peter wasn't here to buy dumplings. He walked with a stillness that wasn't shy. It was measured, calculated, the kind of calm people notice too late. One of the first men to really see Peter was an old herbalist named Wong. He watched from his shop window as Peter greeted a restaurant owner with a bow, then laughed over something barely spoken. The laugh was short, precise, like punctuation. What Wong didn't know then was that Peter had come not just to visit, he was beginning a quiet campaign. Not with violence, not with drugs or bribes, with respect, with memory, with favors traded like sacred paper charms. He started small, translating letters for elderly tenants, helping immigrants navigate visa forms, sponsoring lion dance teams. And through each act, he threaded something subtler: obligation. By the time the community noticed how often Peter's name was mentioned in whispers, he'd already seated himself at the table. No invitation, just a smile and a chair that hadn't yet been claimed. It helped that he moved like someone used to authority, but allergic to spectacle. While other young men flaunted money in borrowed cars, Peter arrived in a quiet Lexus. Black, unmarked, the kind you'd forget the moment it turned the corner. But when it returned, you'd feel it. Peter's earliest foothold came from what looked like charity, sponsoring scholarship funds, helping local businesses secure legal permits. But each action had a ledger behind it, a mental record of who owed what, who looked away, who didn't shake his hand. Many people still think that Peter's success was purely about luck or charisma. But what do you think? Could someone without a deeper playbook rise that fast in a world that chews through hopefuls weekly? By the mid-1980s, Chinatown was experiencing a kind of invisible war. The old tongs were splintering. Generational gaps widened. Kids who didn't speak fluent Cantonese were challenging elders who did. And Peter, he didn't pick a side. He built one. His own. He'd invite elders to banquets where he spoke softly about tradition and unity, then hold private dinners with younger men, those with ambition and nothing left to lose. Some called him a broker, others called him a bridge. But Peter didn't correct anyone. He just kept collecting influence like poker chips, only rarely revealing his hand. The first real sign of his influence came not from a police report, but a wedding. A small banquet hall on Clay Street hosted a marriage between two families once at odds. Red envelopes flowed. Firecrackers screamed into the night. But the most talked about thing was the man who gave the toast, Peter Chong. He wasn't related to either side, but both bowed to him before anyone else. That's when the FBI put his name on the board, not because he'd committed a crime, but because everyone kept thanking him. His ability to remain just outside suspicion, just beyond legal reach, that became his calling card. And in a neighborhood used to muscle and firepower, Peter's style was unnervingly clean. One agent later remarked, "It was like chasing steam in a teacup. You saw the ripples, you felt the heat, but he was never there. And yet, Peter was always there, at every fundraiser, every funeral, every celebration that mattered. He stood just close enough to be honored, just far enough to never be blamed. At night, in the quiet spaces between businesses, his real work began. Sometimes it was a favor called in, sometimes a promise whispered over jasmine tea, and sometimes it was nothing but a glance that meant, wait, he didn't own a gun, didn't need to. His weapon was memory, his and yours. He remembered birthdays, he remembered debts, and if you forgot either, well, Chinatown had a way of reminding you. But Peter wasn't just building power, he was mapping need. He knew who owed immigration lawyers, who needed protection from rivals, who sent cash back to Guangzhou every month and couldn't afford delays. He didn't threaten, he suggested. And his suggestions were harder to ignore than most men's threats. By the end of that first year, his name was spoken with a kind of reverence, but never too loudly. Never when his back was turned. Chinatown had found its unofficial mayor. And Peter? He wasn't running for office. He was installing the furniture. Before the quiet steps through Chinatown, before the black Lexus and red envelopes, Peter Chong is a boy watching his homeland unravel. Born in Singapore in the early 1950s, he grows up in a city balancing ancient Chinese tradition with the sudden muscle of Western finance. His father is a clerk. His mother sells steamed buns outside a textile mill. Their apartment sits above a mechanic's shop, and every night, young Peter listens to the hiss of air compressors and the clang of wrenches instead of bedtime stories. Singapore during those years is no playground. Colonial hangover still lingers. Ethnic tension flares up more than once. And like many Chinese families in the region, the Chongs live with quiet anxiety about politics, food prices, and the unspoken risk of saying the wrong thing too loudly. Peter isn't the strongest kid, but he's sharp. Not just academically, emotionally. He knows when to duck, when to nod, when to say nothing at all. These small acts of self-preservation become habit, then strategy. He notices who holds power in every room, even if it's the boy with the longest silence. By 14, he's watching the news like a man twice his age, memorizing how authority speaks, how it dresses. At 16, while other boys obsess over Bruce Lee or soccer, Peter reads about trade routes and black markets. He never tells anyone this. It's not that he's ashamed. It's just no one else is playing the same game. A mainstream historical fact here. During the 1960s, Singapore experiences a wave of political crackdowns and curfews as the nation breaks from Malaysia and begins forging its independent path. Many Chinese families, especially those suspected of communist leanings or gang affiliations, face surveillance or exile. Peter watches one such exile occur when a neighbor disappears after a midnight knock. The family says nothing. The door stays closed for weeks. It plants something in Peter. Not fear exactly, but awareness. Systems exist. They can crush you, but they can also be read, bent, and, with enough foresight, outpaced. By 18, Peter has learned English so well that he mimics BBC accents when he's bored. He speaks Cantonese, Mandarin, and a bit of Malay. His grades earn him a spot in an American college, California. And so, with a second-hand suitcase and promises to call once a month, he boards a plane that takes him far from the humid streets of his childhood. America, at first, is loud, fast, rude in a way that fascinates him. He arrives in the Bay Area just as disco is peaking, just as neighborhoods are shifting, just as immigrants are rewriting cities one grocery store at a time. He lives with 3 other students in a rented apartment and works nights cleaning office buildings. Not because he has to, his scholarship covers tuition, but because he wants to listen, to see what people throw away. He hears confessions in paper form, divorce filings, unpaid invoices, eviction notices. He reads them all. He begins to understand the rhythms of American failure. His professors love him. His classmates don't quite get him. He dresses well, but never flashy. He listens, but rarely shares. And yet he's everywhere. Student government, cultural clubs, even the occasional church picnic. He builds relationships like scaffolding, quietly, but with clear intent. It's during this time that Peter meets his first real mentor in the U.S., a man named Uncle Yao, who owns a Chinese seafood restaurant near Oakland. Yao is gruff, pragmatic, and widely respected. He also has a back room where cash is counted and favors are discussed. Peter doesn't start working there. He just visits, eats lunch, talks about old poems. But slowly, he's drawn into the rhythms of Chinatown economics, how things really get done. Uncle Yao, like many men of his generation, is part of a Chong, a Chinese benevolent association with historic ties to both charity and, occasionally, organized crime. He doesn't flaunt it, but Peter sees the subtle nods, the way young men with sharp haircuts listen more than speak, the way a shipment delay is resolved with a phone call and a 5-minute walk. One afternoon, as Peter finishes his tea, Yao says, "You're good at seeing things, but are you good at making people see you?" Peter doesn't answer. He just smiles, and that, Yao later says, was the moment he knew. Peter doesn't jump in head first. He learns slowly, methodically, watching how tongs operate, how disputes are mediated over dim sum, how punishment is whispered, not shouted, how loyalty isn't bought, it's layered, built like lacquer. Many people still think that Peter stumbled into the underworld by accident, that he was pulled in by hunger or desperation. But so what do you think? Can a man this meticulous really just fall into power? One of Peter's most formative experiences during this era isn't criminal at all. It's bureaucratic. He volunteers with a Chinatown immigration clinic, helping newly arrived elders fill out forms. There, he sees just how complex, fragile, and exploitable the U.S. immigration system can be. Names misspelled, birth dates lost in translation, families waiting 10 years for a green card. Others jump ahead with the right phone number. He starts keeping a mental map of how immigration intersects with desperation. And when you understand people's desperation, you understand leverage. By the time he finishes college, Peter has a new kind of degree, one in Chinatown mechanics. He knows who runs which block. He knows which businesses are actually fronts, and which old men carry more weight than they let on. He's polite to everyone, never rushes a conversation, always leaves a little food on his plate, just to show he's not greedy. And when he moves into the city full-time, his first job isn't at a corporation, it's at a Chinatown community center, Officially, he's coordinating cultural outreach. Unofficially, he's auditing the balance of power. One of his first moves? Hosting a heritage preservation banquet. Harmless enough. But he arranges the seating chart with surgical precision. Rivals sit close. Dissenters sit far. Elders at the front. Up-and-comers 2 tables behind. He doesn't make speeches. Just greets everyone with a nod, listens, and leaves early. That night, several guests go home wondering, who was that young man? Others already know, and they take note. Peter isn't famous yet, but something in the air has changed. A presence has entered the room. Not loud, not urgent, but steady, like incense curling through the ceiling beams. The first time Peter Chong steps into a Tong hall, the air is thick with age and reverence. It's not the scent of incense that strikes him first. It's the silence. Not absence of sound, but the kind of measured hush that means tradition is present. The room is narrow, walls lined with faded portraits of serious men in formal robes. In the corner, a red altar flickers beneath the solemn gaze of Guangong, the Chinese god of loyalty and war. Peter doesn't bow right away. He watches. He reads the room just like he always does. Tonight's gathering is informal, hosted by a mid-level elder named Chong, who's heard about the respectful kid with the clean shoes and full pockets. Peter arrives with a gift, ginseng, not too flashy, wrapped in red cloth, and waits to be invited into conversation. The Tongs have long histories in Chinatown. Formed in the 19th century to protect Chinese immigrants from discrimination and violence, they began as community groups. But over time, protection turned to control, assistance into obligation. Some remained benign, but others evolved into shadow governments with criminal reach. San Francisco's Tongs are no different. Some rooted in culture, others in crime. Most in both. Peter doesn't ask to join. He doesn't need to. He simply listens. When old Mr. Fong complains about rent increases, Peter nods. When someone mentions a police inspection coming to the fish market, Peter offers to look into it. He never makes promises, only offers calm questions and the potential for follow-through. That night, he walks home with a phone number scribbled on a folded napkin. No official invite, but the door is open. That's how the Tongs operate. No handshakes, just small permissions. Over the next few months, Peter drifts deeper into these halls. He becomes known as the man who solves problems discreetly. A permit issue? Peter knows someone at city zoning. A vendor dispute? Peter finds a compromise before it becomes a brawl. He bridges generations, the American-born youths who feel disconnected from tradition, and the old guard who believe everything's been falling apart since 1955. He learns the power of the round table. Every Tong meeting is a performance. Tea poured at just the right pace, grievances aired like gossip, favors offered like riddles. Nothing is direct. Everything is understood. The Tong Peter orbits most closely is Hop Sing. Not the most violent, not the richest, but the most stable. Its members run bakeries, import businesses, and yes, a few card rooms in the basements of grocery stores. Hop Sing values reputation over aggression. Peter fits in perfectly. One night, a minor lieutenant asks him, "So what's your angle? You ain't got family here. No roots." Peter shrugs. Roots grow if you water them. It's not a threat. It's not even clever. But the man nods, and word spreads. Peter thinks long-term. Many people still think that Peter was recruited, groomed by older Tongs to be their front man. But so what do you think? Isn't it possible he was grooming them all along? His ability to navigate the blurred space between tradition and ambition becomes his secret weapon. Elders appreciate his respect for rituals. Youth admire his forward thinking. And Peter never pushes. He just creates space, politely, patiently, until he's standing where others used to be. Meanwhile, Chinatown itself is shifting. The 1980s bring waves of new immigrants, many undocumented, many desperate. With them comes opportunity. Visas, green card arrangements, job placements, all of which can be helped for a price. Peter sees it all happening and files it away. Not for today, but soon. He continues his work at the community center, now trusted enough to act as liaison between city officials and Chinatown merchants. He walks both sides with ease. At city council meetings, he quotes Confucius. At private dinners, he quotes Nixon. One specific event sharpens his image: a public dispute between two restaurant owners over a shared loading dock. The city wants to fine them both. Lawyers threaten court. Peter walks in, offers tea, listens for an hour, and then says, "What if one uses it in the morning, the other afternoon?" It's not genius, but it works. And more importantly, it keeps everyone looking at him. That moment echoes. For months afterward, disputes don't go to police or lawyers. They go to Peter, and then comes the real test. A young gang member named Derek, loosely tied to the Hua Qing, is arrested for assault near Portsmouth Square. The arrest threatens to spark conflict between rival groups. Peter doesn't flinch. He calls a meeting, not at a temple, but a seafood restaurant's back room. Neutral ground. He invites representatives from 3 factions, serves tea before anyone can argue, and offers a solution that saves face for all sides. Derek pleads to a lesser charge. The elders claim reform is underway, and the victim gets a business license expedited by a city contact. No one wins, but no one loses. That's Peter's style. Afterward, one elder whispers, "He doesn't act like a gangster." "No," replies another. "He acts like a mayor." Peter's place among the Tongs is now permanent, even if unofficial. He doesn't wear colors, doesn't demand tribute. He simply is. At the same time, he begins acquiring legitimate businesses, on paper at least. A seafood distribution company, a travel agency, a warehouse in Daly City. Each one staffed by trusted hands, each one a layer in his growing operation. Not flashy, not loud, just enough to stay busy and hard to pin down. It's around this time that an old mentor from his early days, Uncle Yao, quietly retires and leaves Chinatown for good. No public farewell. Just a sealed envelope with Peter's name on it, containing a simple phrase: "Keep your shoes clean and never owe a favor you didn't ask for." Peter places the note in his desk drawer. He never speaks of it again. Meanwhile, the Tongs are changing. Some are leaning harder into the drug trade, others dissolving entirely as younger members lose interest in tradition. Peter doesn't resist change. He just redirects it. He begins inviting select non-Tong players into his meetings: real estate agents, immigration lawyers, even a few distant cousins from Hong Kong. He's building something bigger than a gang. Something that doesn't need a name on the front door. Something that looks, on the surface, like a coalition of Chinatown businessmen. And nothing more. And if you ask Peter what he's doing, he'll just smile and say, "Helping the community," with that same small laugh, short, precise, like punctuation. The door to the gambling parlor opens without a sound. Just the soft shift of a sliding panel behind a seafood stall off Stockton Street. Inside, everything smells faintly of camphor, cigarette ash, and steamed buns. The room is dim but clean, the green felt of the card tables worn but not ragged. At the far end, A man in his 40s loses $50 without flinching. No raised voices. No one keeps time. Only the subtle scrape of tiles and the low murmur of Cantonese. This is where Peter Chong's empire begins to thicken. He doesn't run the games himself, never touches the cards. But he owns the building, the stall out front, and the fishery that supplies it. The gambling den. Technically a storage room. On paper, the tiles and chairs belong to a cultural association that meets bi-weekly to promote mahjong literacy. To understand Peter's power, you have to understand how money moves in Chinatown. It's not in vaults or armored cars. It passes through hands, unrecorded, folded into red envelopes, swapped over soup and soy sauce. And nothing moves money like gambling. San Francisco's Chinatown has always had a gambling undercurrent. From the gold rush days onward, it's been a haven for games of chance. Pai Gow, Fan Tan, low-stakes poker. Officially, it's illegal. Unofficially, it's cultural. Police know it. Judges know it. So does Peter. What Peter does differently is this. He organizes it. Not for spectacle, but for flow. He sets rules, quiet rules. No drugs at the tables. No outsiders without a sponsor. No threats. No flashing weapons. No loud voices. The kind of order that makes chaos profitable. And that's when Chinatown starts to notice. Peter's casinos aren't the wild ones. They're boring, controlled. People don't come to blow off steam. They come because they know the cards will be honest, the stakes predictable, and the exit safe. He sets up a few of them, scattered in basements and back rooms, never more than a dozen players per night. They look like community game rooms. Fluorescent lights, lukewarm tea, maybe a TV in the corner playing Cantonese soap operas, but each room runs numbers, and those numbers feed up the chain. One mainstream historical fact here. During the 1980s and 90s, underground gambling operations in U.S. Chinatowns were known to be linked to Asian criminal syndicates, including Hong Kong-based triads like the 14K and Sun Yi-on. These operations often used legitimate businesses as fronts and relied on tight ethnic networks to ensure security and silence. Peter watches this carefully. He doesn't declare himself a gangster. He doesn't wear jewelry or drive a Lamborghini. He simply turns gambling into a utility, like water, like power, and the community, it benefits. He donates to local schools. He fixes potholes before the city does. He buys new uniforms for the lion dance teams. It becomes hard to hate him, even if you suspect he's the reason your cousin dropped $5,000 in a single night. There's one gambling house in particular, above a bakery on Jackson Street, that becomes legendary. The bakers downstairs work all night, kneading dough while, just one floor up, fortunes are whispered over dice. The whole building hums like a machine. Peter visits occasionally, but never stays long. He makes a few quiet jokes, nods to the dealer, then vanishes back into the alleyways. He never stays for a win, never lingers after a loss. Presence, not participation. That's the strategy his lieutenants manage the night to night. Each is picked not for strength, but calm. One is an ex-accountant. Another used to run a church choir. None have tattoos. All wear buttoned shirts. They call Peter Sifu, teacher, and they mean it. Many people still think Peter's rise was thanks to violence behind closed doors. But so what do you think? Can a man build a gambling empire without a single public outburst, without a single mugshot? There is one story that floats through the neighborhood like incense smoke. A new player, young, brash, mainland accent, tries to cheat, swaps a tile mid-hand, He's caught quietly by the hostess. She says nothing, just nods to the corner. Peter's man approaches, leans down, whispers something in the kid's ear. The kid goes pale, stands up, leaves, doesn't come back. No one knows what was said. But 2 weeks later, the same kid is spotted at a Chinatown soup kitchen, serving rice with both hands. He bows deeply to an old man in line. That's all anyone sees. But the message lands. There's a way to lose gracefully. Peter's way. It's not all magic. There are raids. Twice, his places get hit. But each time, the officers find nothing more than leftover tea and some unregistered mahjong sets. No drugs, no ledgers, no cash piles, just friends playing games. What can they really prove? That's the brilliance. Peter's operations run clean. If you're going to operate in a legal gray area, you keep the dust off your shoes and the receipts in someone else's drawer. And while the gambling parlors earn revenue, they also serve another function: recruitment. Young men who show promise at the tables, patience, focus, respect, get noticed. Not hired, just watched. If one keeps his mouth shut, if one intervenes to stop a scuffle without raising his voice, he might get invited for tea. If he declines politely, even better. Peter doesn't build a gang, he builds a culture, and within that culture, gambling becomes a lesson. Not just in odds or luck, but in reading people, understanding rhythms, knowing when to fold, when to bet, and when to say nothing at all. It's through this world of quiet cards and backroom tea that Peter's influence expands. Beyond Chinatown, into Daly City, into San Jose, into Seattle. Like a breath of smoke under a door, a city councilman once joked at a dinner banquet. Peter should open a Vegas franchise. He'd run it quieter than the libraries. Peter smiled, toasted, and changed the subject. Because that's the point. The game isn't the game. It's what the game hides. And as the nights stretch on and the money flows clean, Peter knows. This is just the beginning. He walks into the city chamber like he owns the floor plan. Pressed lapels, gold cufflinks, eyes that neither flinch nor flatter. By this point, Peter Chong isn't just a name in Chinatown. He's the name. And no one can quite agree on how he got there. To the elders, he's the bridge between generations. To the youth, he's the man who made quiet power look cool. To outsiders, he's the polished community leader who always donates, always shows up in a suit, always smiles just right for the newspaper. The charmer in the suit, they call him. By the late 1980s, Peter has learned something most gangsters never do. Politics isn't a threat. It's an accessory. You don't fight the system. You attend its ribbon cuttings. You sponsor its galas. You become the honorary co-chair of the Lunar New Year Parade Committee. Not because you care about dragons or drums, but because influence has more than one face. His businesses, on paper, are impeccable. A seafood company that supplies restaurants up and down the coast. A logistics group that manages Chinatown deliveries with suspicious efficiency. A cultural center that hosts poetry readings. And occasionally screens martial arts films that no one recalls approving. Peter shows up at City Hall fundraisers with a smile, a checkbook, and a bottle of rare Mau Tai for the mayor. He doesn't say much, but when he does, it's always framed in community values: safety, heritage, opportunity. It's hard to argue with him because he never actually says anything. Mainstream historical fact. During the 1980s and 1990s, organized crime in U.S. Chinatowns began moving into more sophisticated financial crimes: money laundering, visa scams, tax fraud. often hiding behind community outreach and legitimate-looking small businesses. In many cases, criminal figures became donors or community leaders to camouflage deeper networks of activity. Peter perfects this duality. He speaks in perfect English at city press conferences and in soft Cantonese to temple elders. He quotes Confucius at cultural events, but slips Reagan quips into business meetings. He's impossible to pin down. One night, he hosts a fundraising banquet for a local congresswoman. The event takes place in the ballroom of a Chinatown hotel he doesn't technically own, but whose board includes 3 men who used to play mahjong in his basement years ago. Peter speaks for 2 minutes, thanks the congresswoman for her integrity, and sits down to a round of applause. After the event, a journalist leans over to a police contact and whispers, "Isn't that the guy the FBI flagged 2 years ago?" The cop shrugs. "He just paid for the shrimp." That's the shield. Peter doesn't hide in shadows. He moves through spotlights, slow and silent, so no one sees the edges. But within Chinatown, the charisma is sharper. His word becomes law, even when it's not delivered directly. If Peter suggests a merchant revise their prices, they revise them. If he hopes a new street mural will include a certain family name, it suddenly does. He's not feared like a boss. He's obeyed like a proverb. And then there are the whispers about the men he brings in from Hong Kong, the cousins who appear out of nowhere with business licenses and crisp American suits, about the meetings he holds late at night in a seafood restaurant's basement, where no fish is served and no receipts are written. But nothing sticks, not yet. Many people still think that Peter's charm was the result of luck, or maybe just a better tailor. But so what do you think? Can charm alone convince an entire neighborhood to fall in line? He doesn't drink in public. He never raises his voice. His cologne is barely noticeable. Clean, citrus, gone by the time you try to name it. These are not accidents. Peter learns to command without instruction. He nods, and the room adjusts. He excuses himself, and the conversation dies down. Even when he jokes, softly, precisely, it's the kind of joke people repeat days later, unsure whether it was humor or instruction. There's one story that floats through the community. During a particularly heated neighborhood zoning debate, a local landlord refuses to budge on his building's renovation schedule. The delays would stall Peter's plans to open a heritage center nearby. Peter sends him a fruit basket. No note, just persimmons, oranges, and a single Chinese chess piece. Jiang, the general. 2 days later, the renovations are approved. The landlord moves to Daly City. He's never named in the press. Peter sees to that. A quiet phone call to an editor. A donation to a scholarship fund. A new quote from someone else. Someone willing to say, "Peter? Oh, he's just a businessman. Cares about the kids." Behind the scenes, his personal office is almost austere. A few framed calligraphy scrolls, a jade dragon on a shelf, a desk too clean for real work. But the drawers are locked tight, and somewhere in the wall, it's rumored, there's a safe that's never been found. Peter begins expanding his reach outside San Francisco. He starts flying down to Los Angeles for seafood conferences. A dim sum parlor in Monterey Park suddenly changes ownership and doubles its revenue within months. A community center in San Jose starts receiving generous anonymous donations and also quietly rents out its back hall to private members twice a week. No one calls it a syndicate. No one would dare. But Chinatown begins to change. Less street violence, more structure, more predictability. The kind of calm that feels staged. He installs trusted figures at key intersections. A funeral director who knows which deaths to ask about. a florist who passes messages tucked beneath lilies, a baker who keeps a second ledger, handwritten and hidden behind the bags of rice flour. It's not paranoia, it's choreography. Peter's world expands without spectacle. The men who used to run things notice, but they don't resist. They retire early. Their kids get jobs at community banks. Everyone wins. On the surface, and through it all, Peter's reputation grows. Not like wildfire, more like fog. Quiet, unstoppable, present whether you like it or not. One Chinatown elder, when asked what made Peter different, paused, then said, "Other men want to be king. Peter wants to be remembered, and that changes everything." The heartbeat of Chinatown isn't its parades, or the dragons, or even the lanterns. It's the business, the real business, the late-night deliveries, the handshake deals done behind tea shops, the ledger entries never entered into QuickBooks. And at the center of that quiet pulse is Peter Chong, whose empire has now shifted from rising to reigning. By the early 1990s, Peter's name is no longer just known in San Francisco. It's respected, revered in some circles. But the brilliance isn't in his public image. It's in how hidden he keeps the machinery behind it. It starts with seafood. On paper, Peter's Seafood Company is a model of immigrant entrepreneurship. It supplies dozens of restaurants across the Bay Area, clean trucks, timely deliveries, quality products. But what no one sees is how those same trucks make stops that never appear on manifests. How a delivery to a sushi bar includes, along with the halibut, a sealed envelope tucked into a styrofoam cooler. Then comes the herbal medicine boom. Peter invests in traditional medicine shops, ginseng, deer antler powder, tiger balm. They become fronts for quiet conversations, discreet transactions, community favors. He even funds a scholarship for students studying traditional Chinese medicine, which, on the surface, is altruistic, but also happens to win him the loyalty of half a dozen families tied to the Herbalist Guild. And then there are the seafood markets, not the ones tourists walk through, but the back rooms, the hidden freezers, the private doors that lead to upstairs rooms where decisions are made far from prying eyes. These spaces, clean, humble, aromatic, become the real boardrooms of Chinatown. And Peter holds court without ever calling it that. He doesn't yell. He doesn't threaten. He simply poses questions. How's your cousin's visa going? You still having trouble with those permits? Did your daughter get into that school? And when he asks, people answer, because they know he remembers. One mainstream historical fact: throughout the late 20th century, many immigrant communities in urban America used small businesses like groceries and pharmacies as informal hubs for information sharing, organizing, and yes, illicit coordination. In Chinatowns, these respectable businesses often masked more complicated financial ecosystems, sometimes tied to foreign networks. Peter understands this better than most. He doesn't just use the system, he is the system. His network stretches further than anyone realizes. He has men in San Jose who send him updates written in code, women in Sacramento who manage paperwork for consulting clients that no one ever meets, a temple in Oakland that, once a week, turns its main hall into a meeting room for Peter's lieutenants, disguised as community lectures on heritage and language. And his control isn't forced. It's welcomed. That's the real trick. When a Chinatown vendor is robbed, Peter sends someone to check on them before the police arrive. When a restaurant owner is harassed by a city inspector, that inspector gets reassigned the next quarter. When an elder's apartment has a plumbing issue, a plumber shows up at dawn. and doesn't charge a dime. The message is clear. Peter protects his own, and his own includes almost everyone. But influence like that doesn't grow without friction. Not everyone appreciates how quiet his takeover has been. Some old-school gang members, those who still believe in fists and fear, begin to grumble. They think Peter's too soft, too clean, too smug in his silk shirts and speechless power. One of them, a mid-tier enforcer with ties to a rival Chong, tries to set up shop on Peter's turf, opens a gambling parlor without approval, brings in low-level muscle from out of town, loud kids with tattoos and tempers. Within a week, the place is shut down, not by force, but by silence. The landlord evicts them. The delivery trucks stop showing up. No one will lend them cash. Word is out. They're radioactive, and the man behind the curtain, he never even made a call. His people knew what to do. Still, Chinatown isn't a vacuum. Across the ocean, Hong Kong is churning with its own underworld drama. The 14K triad is expanding, looking for new footholds, especially in North America. Rumors start flying that Peter's influence has attracted international attention, that he might be sanctioned, even supported by bigger fish. Peter, of course, denies this, in his usual way. Someone once asked him, point blank, if he had any connections to the triads. He smiled and replied, "Do you think they'd send someone with my haircut? It's a joke, maybe." Many people still think that Peter was a domestic creation, a Chinatown invention shaped by American loopholes. But so what do you think? If someone from overseas gave him their blessing, would anyone really know? Peter never confirms. He never denies. He simply hosts another charity dinner. He also begins shifting the center of his operations. Less visible storefronts, more shell companies, a few import-export firms with minimal staff and maximum paperwork. One even lists him as an occasional consultant, just in case the IRS comes sniffing. Behind it all, though, the heart of his network remains local. Peter believes in control he can touch. He doesn't text. He doesn't email. If you want to talk to him, you get an address, a time, and a teacup. His presence is ritualized, always arrives late, always sits with his back to the wall, always brings something, fruit, wine, a small gift. He understands face. He defines face, and those Chinatown streets he used to walk as a curious student. Now, when he walks them, doors open. Old men tip their heads. Kids are taught not to point. He's not called boss. He's not called Don. They just call him Mr. Chong, and that's enough. The whispers begin in Hong Kong first, quiet as incense smoke curling behind closed temple doors. Someone asks if Peter Chong is really who he says he is, a Singaporean-born American, a seafood man with a soft voice and iron calm, or something else, something older, colder, more triad. San Francisco's Chinatown doesn't get the news all at once. It trickles in, through visiting businessmen, through red envelope messengers from Kowloon, through gossip poured out with hot tea in locked rooms. Peter's name, it turns out, is known in places he's never claimed to visit. In Wan Chai, in Mongkok, among the ghost bosses who still sip baijiu from gold-rimmed glasses and never sit with their backs exposed. The rumor is this: Peter is connected to 14K. Now, for those not deep in the underworld archives, here's a mainstream historical fact. The 14K is one of the largest and most feared triad societies originating in Hong Kong, known for extortion, drug trafficking, and international reach. At its peak, it operated in at least 20 countries and maintained influence across gambling, prostitution, and transnational crime, often hiding behind Chinese benevolent associations. That's the name floating in Peter's shadow now. The connections are never confirmed, but they're not denied either. Some say Peter met a 14K delegate in Vancouver. Others say the delegate was Peter, sent abroad to expand the family tree with silk gloves and a Stanford accent. One theory even suggests Peter's seafood empire was seeded by triad funds needing American laundering channels. Peter, of course, smiles at the rumors. When a reporter once asked him, off the record, about his alleged overseas ties, he said, "My only tie to Hong Kong is a tailor on Nathan Road. Lovely man, always gets the cuffs right." And yet, new men begin appearing in Chinatown. Men with quiet steps and expensive watches. Men who don't speak much, but bow deeply and only make eye contact when required. They show up at Peter's gatherings, seated 2 rows behind, always watching. They never introduce themselves, but they're always invited. Then there's the matter of the bank account. A small community credit union in the East Bay receives a sudden, large deposit from a Hong Kong-based trust. Weeks later, the bank's manager is seen dining with Peter at a closed-door banquet. The same bank begins offering low-interest loans to businesses tied to Peter's associates. Coincidence? Maybe. Many people still think Peter became a triad boss. But so what do you think? Could it be he simply played the part so convincingly the triads themselves couldn't tell the difference? What makes the situation more complicated is that Peter doesn't act like a triad. He doesn't enforce loyalty with beatings or blood rituals. He enforces it with memory, with structure, with systems that make disobedience feel like inefficiency. And then there's the shrine. In a quiet upstairs office, above a dumpling shop no longer open to the public, Peter keeps a private altar, candles, incense, an old portrait of a man said to be his great-uncle, dressed in Qing-era robes, staring down with an expression halfway between patience and warning. No one is allowed in that room without Peter present. But those who have been in say there's a map on the wall, not of California, not of China, a hand-drawn map of routes, arrows between port cities, shipping lanes, red lines marking flows of commodities. It's unclear what those commodities are, but the lines tell a story. This is not just about Chinatown anymore. Peter's operation is becoming international, quietly. No headlines, just movement. A new seafood warehouse opens near the port of Oakland. Legitimate, fully licensed. But one customs officer notices an unusually high volume of crates coming from Kaohsiung, Taiwan's major port. The manifests say dried scallops. The crates are sealed unusually tight. They pass inspection. Nothing is found. But weeks later, a DEA officer notes that certain meth shipments traced to Asian syndicates have increased dramatically along the West Coast. No one names Peter, but his warehouse is mapped on the corkboard in the back office. Inside Chinatown, the whispers grow louder, but only behind closed doors. No one confronts Peter, because no one is sure who's backing him anymore. The local gangs, the Hong Kong old guard, a new hybrid that doesn't yet have a name. He still walks the same streets, still drinks his tea, but his eyes scan a little slower now, calculating, not paranoid, just aware. There's a moment, recounted by a restaurateur who once owed Peter a favor. He says Peter came in late one night, after closing, sat at a corner booth, and stared out the window for 10 full minutes. Said nothing, just drank a pot of pure tea. Then stood, nodded once, and left. The next day, the restaurateur found an envelope under his office door. Inside, a legal document transferring a 15% share of his business back to him. No note, no explanation. "I think," the man said later. He was reminding me he still watches the door I forgot to lock. Peter's world is now stitched with that kind of subtle gravity. A glance means a paragraph. A pause means a contract. And when his name shows up in the notebooks of FBI agents and federal prosecutors, it's often next to question marks, not evidence. Even his closest lieutenants don't know the whole picture. One manages the seafood routes, one oversees cultural events, one arranges legal counsel for at-risk youth. But only Peter knows how the puzzle fits, because only he designed the puzzle. Still, the question lingers. Why not confirm the triad rumors? He could deny them, release a statement, offer paperwork, but he doesn't, because the fear is useful, because the myth makes people cautious, because when you let the world wonder what you're connected to, you don't have to lift a finger to make them hesitate. It starts with a name, not Peter's, someone else's. A low-level Chinatown enforcer named Tom Lee, who once ran errands for a bakery that no longer exists. One morning, he's found in a dumpster in Daly City, alive, bruised, and missing the better part of a week's memory. He claims he saw something he shouldn't have. Something about a meeting in a noodle shop that wasn't really a noodle shop. Something about red folders and Mandarin whispered with mainland accents. The police write it down. The FBI reads it. And then Tom Lee disappears again, this time voluntarily, moves to Nevada, starts working at a gas station, refuses to speak to anyone. That's when the feds get serious. By 1992, the FBI has had Peter Chong's name pinned to their investigation board for over a year, but not under organized crime. No, he's on the Immigration Fraud Task Force's radar, and that's where the threads start to pull together. Peter's clean on paper. No arrests, no fingerprints in databases, no criminal associations that hold water. But money is moving. Names are changing. Addresses listed on immigration documents lead to warehouses or apartments with no furniture, and neighbors who say, "I never see nobody live there." It's subtle, but it's enough to justify listening. So they start. The first step is surveillance. Basic stuff. Photos, notes, tracking vehicle plates. One agent parks outside Peter's seafood warehouse every Tuesday morning for 6 weeks. He sees nothing, just workers loading shrimp in boxes. One time, he swears he sees a man slip out the back with a briefcase, but there's no license plate to follow, and the cameras on that corner don't work. Convenient. Then come the bugs, mainstream historical fact. By the early 1990s, the FBI had developed advanced audio surveillance tools and began targeting organized criminal suspects with warrant-approved bugs in phones, offices, and even cars, often hoping to catch indirect conversations rather than confessions. They wire one of Peter's associates' phones, a man named Calvin Benny Kwok, who runs a shipping company adjacent to the Port of Oakland. The calls are vague, lots of mentions of boxes and favors, no direct names, but one call stands out. Benny says, he already knows, he always knows, just bring the tea. The FBI listens, logs it, but tea could be anything. Still, something shifts. The Bureau starts calling it what it is, a syndicate. And Peter is no longer a person of interest. He's a central figure. Agents follow him to luncheons, cultural events, even a Chinese opera fundraiser in San Jose, where Peter donates $25,000 and leaves early. They follow him to Daly City, to a lawyer's office that doubles as a notary service. They follow him to a seafood market in Sacramento that, despite having no website, appears to process more international payments than some banks. But Peter always stays clean. They watch as he gives speeches about youth mentorship, as he delivers baskets of fruit to temples during festival season, as he visits elderly residents in Chinatown housing complexes to check on their heating. What they don't see, what they can't quite prove, is what happens after the lights go out. After the meetings end, one night, an agent watches Peter step out of a community center around 11:30 p.m. The place should be closed. No one else appears to leave. Peter walks 1 block, stops at a curb, and stands there for 20 minutes. Doesn't check a watch, doesn't pull out a phone, just stands. At 11:52, a black van drives past. Doesn't stop. Peter turns, walks the other way. Gone. The Bureau calls it the ghost walk. He does it often. Never the same time, never the same corner, but always followed by a ripple. Someone leaves the country. Someone withdraws cash. Someone shuts down a business and leaves no forwarding address. They get one break. Sort of. A junior agent manages to infiltrate one of the warehouses under the guise of a fire code inspector. Inside, everything appears spotless. Clean floors, organized shelving. But near the back, he notices a single carton sealed in layers of tape, labeled only as ceremonial goods. When he returns with a warrant, the carton is gone. That's when the frustration starts to mount. Peter seems untouchable. But worse, he seems aware. The agents start to suspect leaks, that someone inside the department is tipping him off. Or maybe it's not a leak. Maybe Peter just knows people, knows how systems talk before they move, knows that a paper trail creaks before it shuffles. Many people still think that the FBI exaggerated Peter's threat level, that maybe he was just a well-connected businessman with a habit of privacy. But so what do you think? If a man predicts every move you make before you make it, what else could he be? They try wiretapping a restaurant he's known to frequent. No luck. He never speaks above a whisper. Music plays. The background noise is too loud. They try recruiting an informant. The man disappears. No foul play, just a relocation. Happily. He opens a barbershop in Honolulu. And then, the kicker. One of Peter's oldest business associates, a man known only as Mr. Lau, is found to have 5 separate passports, all legitimate, all issued within a 2-year period. When questioned, he says he travels often and likes to be prepared. The documents link back to an immigration consultancy founded by Peter's cousin. That's enough. The FBI submits a formal request for deeper investigation, shifting Peter's case into multi-departmental status. Homeland Security is looped in. Financial Crimes begins pulling bank records. IRS agents start scanning for irregularities in seafood inventory. They find just enough. Unusual donations, paper-thin nonprofits, transactions that end in dead company IDs. But Peter? Still clean. He's spotted at a cultural gala in Los Angeles, arm in arm with a state senator. A photo from the event gets printed in a community magazine under the caption, "Unity in Diversity." The agents pin it to the board. No one says it, but they're beginning to wonder, what happens if they can't catch him? It begins with gunfire. 6 quick cracks at 2:12 a.m., shattering the quiet outside a karaoke club on Clay Street. When the smoke clears, 2 men are dead, a third bleeding into the gutter, and the bystanders scatter like spilled dice. Officially, it's a gang dispute. That's what the headlines say. Late night shooting rocks Chinatown. They print in bold type over photos of yellow tape and crumpled cigarette packs on wet pavement. But in the back rooms, behind closed blinds and stone-faced stairs, the question is different. Who gave the order? Because this wasn't random. One of the dead men is known in certain circles as a loudmouth, a runner who'd been pushing into Peter Chong's territory. The other had just flown in from Vancouver. Word was he was here to make a deal. Or disrupt one. Either way, they ended up on the same sidewalk, same blood pool. Peter, notably, is not in town that night. He's attending a fundraiser in San Mateo, wearing a gray suit, giving a speech about cultural exchange. There are photos, witnesses, laughter. The timing is perfect, too perfect. The FBI, already on edge, takes it as confirmation. Something deeper is happening. Something careful, controlled. And the more they dig, the more they find that Peter's empire isn't just built on fraud or money. It's built on absence. He is never in the scene, only around it. Like gravity, like fog. They try tracing calls. The numbers change too often. Prepaid phones, short conversations, always layered through a third party. A woman in Daly City, a payphone in a laundromat, a taxi dispatcher in Oakland who swears he just relays messages for a quiet client. Even when they subpoena records, they find nothing, just scattered debris. A legal document here, a lease with the ink still drying there. A bakery in Peter's network closes the same day the shooting happens. Coincidence? One mainstream historical fact. During this era, Chinatown gang wars in cities like San Francisco and New York were often ignited by turf disputes related to protection rackets, gambling control, and immigration scams. Many of the deaths went unsolved as witnesses were reluctant or afraid to speak, and leaders were rarely tied to the violence directly. That's the exact problem with Peter Chong. Nobody will talk. Not the shopkeepers who heard the shots. Not the waitstaff who served the suspects 2 hours before. Not even the doorman who stood 6 feet away. They all say the same thing. I don't know anything. I just heard fireworks. And Peter? He sends flowers to the families of the dead, to the club owners, even to the hospital where the wounded man recovers, though the name on the card is from a concerned friend of the community. It's subtle, elegant, chilling. The Bureau wants to indict him for something, but the paperwork won't cooperate. Every shell company is legal, every donation squeaky clean. Every restaurant under his umbrella is compliant with health codes. The man files his taxes, pays them early, but agents start seeing patterns in how Peter moves post-shooting. His meetings become shorter. His inner circle shrinks. The men he trusts most now wear earbuds and sit closer. No more long walks through Chinatown. No more lingering at tea houses. He knows. He always knows. And yet, he doesn't hide. He becomes more visible. Speaks at a Lunar New Year banquet. Appears in a local documentary about Chinatown's resilience. Poses for a photo shaking hands with a police commissioner. Smiles with his eyes. The FBI ramps up pressure. They begin looking into everyone tied to him. One agent refers to the investigation as choking the roots to starve the tree. A mid-level associate named Jimmy Chong is arrested for tax fraud. He's held for 72 hours. Released. Doesn't talk. But closes his dry cleaning business the next week and buys a one-way ticket to Taiwan. Another man, a former accountant for one of Peter's seafood warehouses, is caught wiring funds to a mysterious bank in Macau. The transaction flags as suspicious. When questioned, he says he was investing in retirement property. The paperwork? Immaculate. It becomes a pattern. Every time they press on one of Peter's people, the target slips through a crack no one saw coming. Many people still think that Peter ordered the Clay Street hit personally. But so what do you think? Could a man who never carries a phone give an order that echoes louder than gunshots? A former detective says later, he didn't order it. He just made it clear what would happen if the noise didn't stop. And the noise does stop. Chinatown goes quiet again. Too quiet. For weeks. The tension feels thick enough to stir with chopsticks. The gambling dens reduce hours. The street vendors close early. The lion dancers cancel rehearsals. Peter keeps moving, holding meetings, hosting small dinners. No announcements, just presence. One night, at a banquet hall rented for a birthday celebration, he gives a toast. It's short, simple, about family and tradition, and how some things must be protected, even from within. Everyone claps, no one smiles too widely, and in a corner, a young man whispers to another, "He's warning us." The FBI, watching from a distance, feel it too. Something is shifting, not collapsing, but hardening. Peter is adapting, slipping further into his final form, not a criminal, not a politician, a symbol. The shooting, though never officially linked to him, becomes known in certain files as the Red Envelope Incident, because one of the victims, it turns out, had received a red envelope 2 days earlier. No name, no money, just a chess piece. Jiang, the elephant. Defense. Whatever the message was, it came too late. And Peter? He never comments, never changes his route, never stops pouring tea for elders who need it. He simply continues, and that's what frightens the most. To understand how Peter Chong kept his empire running without leaving fingerprints, you have to start with a simple truth. Desperation is a currency, and Peter knew how to print it. He saw opportunity where others saw crisis, and in the 1990s, immigration was ripe with both. Waves of hopefuls were arriving from Hong Kong, Guangdong, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia, some fleeing poverty, others fleeing political uncertainty. Many simply wanted a better shot at life. America promised that. But Peter charged for it, and business was good. It started with referrals, small ones. A cousin in Kowloon wanted to bring his niece over. A friend in Bangkok had a brother who needed a sponsor. Peter connected them with lawyers, helped translate forms, offered guidance at a cost. Nothing illegal, nothing yet. But as the requests grew, so did the system. What began as favors soon turned into operations. Here's how it worked. A network of immigration consultants, some real, some not, would identify clients in Asia willing to pay for a guaranteed path into the U.S. These clients weren't always poor. In fact, many were middle class, educated, and desperate to get out before political changes at home made it harder. For a fee, ranging from $15,000 to $50,000, they'd be promised a U.S. green card, sometimes through fake marriages, sometimes through asylum applications bolstered by fabricated histories, and sometimes through visa lotteries that mysteriously favored those who knew the right names to drop. Peter never handled the paperwork himself. He didn't have to. His network included notaries, paralegals, interpreters, even a few employees inside legitimate immigration law firms. Most didn't know the full scope. They just knew where to send files, what to stamp, when to say, "I don't recall." Mainstream historical fact. During the 1990s, immigration fraud in U.S. cities with large Asian populations became a significant concern, with underground networks fabricating marriage documents, asylum claims, and even government sponsorships. These operations often ran under the guise of legal consulting firms or cultural associations. Peter's setup was no different, except it ran cleaner, quieter, with none of the drama or recklessness that got others caught. He operated through cultural fronts. One in particular, a Chinatown nonprofit focused on family reunification, became the heart of his system. On the surface, it helped elders reconnect with long-lost relatives. Behind the scenes, It processed hundreds of fabricated sponsorship letters and employment offers for people who didn't exist. And the clients, they rarely met Peter. They'd meet a well-dressed assistant, receive instructions, and wait. Months later, some were approved, some weren't. Those who failed never asked for refunds. No one wanted to press a man who didn't threaten, but whose absence spoke louder than any demand. What made the whole thing hum was the plausible deniability. Every step could be explained, every dollar tracked to a service fee. And if someone did ask questions, they'd find nothing but signed affidavits, tax returns, and polite letters printed on thick stock paper. But the FBI was watching. They noticed how many visa applications listed the same sponsor businesses, many tied to Peter's seafood companies or consulting firms. They noticed clusters of clients using identical addresses. A 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery listed as the home for 17 new immigrants. They started to unravel the web, slowly, and they got their first break when an immigration lawyer named Gerald Pham got nervous. Pham, a mid-tier attorney with offices in Daly City, had processed over 200 applications with ties to Peter's network. He wasn't part of the inner circle, but he knew enough to feel the heat. When federal agents came knocking, he didn't resist. He talked, sort of. Pham admitted to processing paperwork for community contacts and not verifying all documents thoroughly. He handed over copies of emails, memos, client lists, enough to spark a deeper investigation. Not enough to arrest Peter, but enough to rattle him. Many people still think that this was Peter's first real mistake, letting the operation scale too fast, too visibly. But so what do you think? Could it be that Peter allowed the immigration scheme to draw attention, to keep the feds busy, while he moved his real assets elsewhere? Because at the same time the immigration scandal grew, Peter started selling off certain businesses, quietly, transferring ownership of a warehouse here, dissolving a seafood company there, shifting things into names that didn't show up on any visa application. He was shedding skin, and still, he never stopped giving speeches, still showed up at cultural parades, still shook hands with state officials. One photo, taken at a Chinese-American business summit in Sacramento, shows Peter standing next to a senator, smiling, perfectly framed by 2 American flags. The caption reads, "Celebrating the spirit of enterprise." The same week that photo was taken, an undocumented immigrant sponsored by one of Peter's companies was found working 16-hour shifts at a warehouse with no listed owner. She had no health insurance, no social security number. She thought she was here legally. She refused to speak to investigators, said she was grateful for the opportunity. And that's what made Peter dangerous. He wasn't just profiting off fraud. He was turning it into a belief, selling the idea that anything was possible if you paid the right person, said the right thing, and kept your head down. Eventually, the FBI launched a formal inquiry into immigration fraud tied to Peter's known associates. Grand jury subpoenas went out. Agents interviewed former clients, attorneys, office staff. They got resistance, a lot of it. Most people claimed ignorance. Some fled the country. Others refused to talk unless granted full immunity, which prosecutors weren't willing to offer. The case crawled. Meanwhile, Peter made a curious move. He donated $100,000 to a Chinatown educational initiative designed to help new immigrants learn their rights. The press release came with a photo of Peter holding a small American flag. No one could tell if he was mocking the system or just proving he was the system. The immigration investigation never caught him. It caught others. A few attorneys lost licenses. A notary went to jail. A handful of clients were deported. But Peter? He remained untouched. because every transaction was buffered, every favor one step removed, every error traceable to someone else. And when one agent privately called him the cleanest dirty man we've ever chased, the entire task force knew they weren't chasing a man, they were chasing a structure. By 1993, Peter Chong's name means many things to many people. To the public, he's the face of progress, a polished figure on Chinatown banners, an honorary guest at scholarship luncheons, a man who donates just enough and smiles just right. To city officials, he's a useful ally. He speaks 5 languages, never causes trouble, and makes introductions that smooth tricky meetings. To federal agents, he's the ghost they can't pin down. A man who breathes through shell companies and slips between subpoenas like mist around a street lamp. But in Chinatown, Peter is something more primal. He's gravity. He's weather. He's the rhythm everything falls into, whether they like it or not. He's also somehow everywhere. There's the travel agency with 4 employees and no walk-in customers, but whose office lights stay on past midnight and whose fax machine hums during odd hours. There's the noodle shop with a second entrance leading not to a kitchen, but to a stairwell that ends in a basement room with 6 chairs, 2 phones, and a desk no one claims. And then there's the temple, where Peter is never seen praying, but always donates incense and rice. And once a year, meets with 3 elders whose names never appear on any organizational chart. Behind it all is a network, refined like silk, and just as hard to hold. His people don't wear badges or speak in code. They just know. A seafood supplier delivers more than crab. A herbalist receives visitors after hours. A dentist upstairs bills patients who never show up, but whose names match entries in Peter's client logs. This isn't just business, it's architecture. A system of relationships that works not because of fear, but because of utility. Peter's world provides things no one else can: a place to sleep, a second identity, a quiet job, or, when needed, a place to disappear. He doesn't issue orders the way other bosses do. He never says, "Do this." Instead, he'll ask, "Have we thought about this route?" Or, "Is there someone else they'd rather hear from?" Or simply, "Let's make sure no one's uncomfortable," and things happen. One mainstream historical fact: the structure of Asian criminal networks during the late 20th century, especially in diaspora communities, was often decentralized and based on long-standing familial, regional, or dialect-based loyalties. Unlike mafia-style organizations with rigid hierarchies, these syndicates operated more like webs, each node important, each strand purposeful. Peter's syndicate, if you could even call it that, resembled this perfectly. No single point of failure, no throne to seize, just a chorus of favors and quiet debts that kept the whole machine humming. He even had his own version of a code. New associates were taught: never offer, only suggest. If it costs you nothing, give freely. If it costs you something, weigh the silence. Respect the story others need to believe. And the people who broke those rules, they didn't get hurt, they just got removed. Not physically, socially. They'd call old contacts and get no answer. They'd stop being invited to meetings. A supplier would be too busy. A landlord would want a new lease signed. Eventually, they'd move out of the city altogether, muttering that Chinatown had changed. Peter didn't exile people. He made them irrelevant. Still, the FBI kept watching. They tapped new phones, monitored Peter's travel records, noted that he hadn't left the country in years, but had received visitors from Singapore, Hong Kong, Vancouver, and Kuala Lumpur. Each guest stayed just long enough to be noticed, but not long enough to be pinned. And the places they visited? Always the same 3. A tea house, a property management firm, a warehouse listed as a non-profit storage facility for festival supplies. Of course, that warehouse also happened to receive weekly shipments that were never part of any customs manifest. The feds tried to intercept one. The crate was opened under warrant, with cameras rolling. Inside, ornamental lanterns, dozens of them. Hand-painted, delicate, each one packed around a core of clay. Later testing showed trace amounts of lithium used in battery construction. Legal, confusing, useless. The warehouse signed a complaint for property damage and requested reimbursement. Peter himself wrote a check and smiled. Many people still think that Peter was a mere opportunist, clever, but not the architect of a true criminal web. But so what do you think? Could a simple opportunist design a system so intricate that even a federal investigation becomes just another obstacle course? It wasn't just law enforcement he managed. It was expectation. Peter understood that people need to believe they live in a lawful world. A place where bad things happen somewhere else, to other kinds of people. He leaned into that belief. He spoke at candlelight vigils, funded after-school programs, donated to earthquake relief in Taiwan. He wasn't hiding behind philanthropy. He was fueling it, making himself part of the very fabric others were trying to unravel. And then slowly, he began stepping back, not away, just back. Fewer public appearances, more proxies. A younger man now ran the seafood company. A different name showed up on property titles. Even his cultural foundation was handed off to a board of community elders who answered to a single silent chair at the end of every table. Peter didn't vanish. He decentralized, and in doing so, he became even harder to catch. Because when the agents came knocking again, they found people, polite, law-abiding people, filing taxes, hosting workshops, smiling for community newsletters. But the room still felt watched. The conversation still felt edited. And in one office drawer, behind old stationery and dried-out pens, an agent found a single slip of paper, unlabeled, folded, faintly scented with tea. It read, "A name on paper means nothing if the hand no longer signs. Behind every Chinatown parade, there's a back alley. Behind every lantern, a hook. And behind Peter Chong's empire, beneath the polished suits, non-profit banners, and scholarship fund photo ops, there's something harder to see. A back door. It's not a metaphor. It's real. Several of them, actually. Secret entrances, side staircases, trap doors concealed behind folding screens or beneath sacks of rice. It's how you moved in Peter's world. Never through the front, never in plain sight. The first of these back rooms was discovered by accident. A city inspector, investigating a fire code violation at a small herbal shop, notices a wooden shelf askew. Behind it, a narrow hallway, dusty, lit by a single bulb. It leads to a cramped space, no bigger than a parking stall, with folding chairs, an ashtray, and a desk scarred with age. No one admits to owning it. The building owner pleads ignorance. The herbalist shrugs. Nothing illegal in the room. Just a room. But to those who know, it's a waiting room. A space for whispered deals, for sorting loyalty from curiosity. And it's not the only one. There's a small Buddhist temple on Jackson Street with an extra stairwell tucked behind the incense counter. There's a seafood distribution warehouse whose loading dock opens into what appears to be a walk-in freezer. But inside, it's warm, carpeted, and contains nothing frozen. Even Peter's favorite tea house has a booth near the back, always reserved, where one waiter is trained to leave the kettle just slightly askew if someone inside doesn't wish to be disturbed. These spaces aren't just for hiding, they're for control. Because Peter understood something fundamental. Visibility is a weapon and a weakness. Let your rivals speak in public. Let the feds chase phone calls. Meanwhile, you build spaces that don't exist on maps. Spaces for memory, for power, for silence. One mainstream historical fact. Throughout the 20th century, many organized crime figures, especially in close-knit communities, relied on unregistered meeting rooms, hidden compartments, and private spaces layered behind legitimate businesses to operate in the blind spots of law enforcement. These spaces weren't lavish. They were efficient, controlled, forgettable. Peter mastered that design. Every back room had a purpose. Some were for money counting, others for passport storage. One, reportedly, was used only for tea. No documents, no deals. Just quiet conversations between people who mattered. No recordings, no paperwork, just shared presence. What makes these rooms so effective isn't what's inside, but who isn't. No staff, no security, no unnecessary bodies. Only those invited. Only those who understand the code. And that code isn't written, it's observed. You knock twice, pause, knock once. You wear black socks, never white. You sit only after you're offered tea, and only sip after the second pour. It sounds like folklore, like superstition. But to Peter, it was architecture for obedience. You respect the room, or you don't get invited back. Many people still think these secret spaces were paranoia. Over-designed flourishes for a man with too much time. But so what do you think? When your enemy listens through walls, don't you want to decide where the walls end? Peter's understanding of space became as strategic as his understanding of silence. He created movement patterns, paths from the back of a funeral home to a private garage beneath a dim sum restaurant. Paths that allowed him to move unseen, or to make others move without seeing him. One associate swore he once met Peter in 4 different locations in a single night. Never through the front door, and never by the same route. And just as important as the spaces themselves were the entrances, or rather, who guarded them. In one case, a retired chef. In another, a florist with bad knees and a smile that never cracked. None were soldiers. All were loyal, because in Peter's world, the least threatening door was always the one you should fear. There's a well-known story in Chinatown lore. A young, over-eager enforcer, sent by a rival group, tries to enter one of Peter's gambling parlors through a side entrance. He's stopped by a janitor, just a bent old man with a mop and a hand that never quite leaves the broom handle. The kid laughs, pushes past. 2 weeks later, the same enforcer's uncle, an importer, finds his business blacklisted. His trucks can't get permits. His containers are randomly selected for extended inspections. After a month of bleeding money, he folds, moves to Canada. The kid disappears. Peter never acknowledges it, never has to, because those who know the layout of the city also know. Peter's not just using back rooms, he's designing them. And the deeper you go into Chinatown, the more the city seems to follow his blueprint. A tea shop closes, reopens with new owners, but the same back hallway. A pawn shop changes hands, but the bell above the door still rings in that same two-tone chime Peter once favored. He's not just occupying space, he's embedding himself in it, which is why, even when the FBI begins mapping out his movements, trying to track buildings, passageways, possible meeting spots, they come up short. There are too many variables, too many false walls, too many doors that shouldn't exist. One agent, after months of surveillance, reportedly asked his superior, "How do you find a man who built the maze he's hiding in?" There's no answer. Just a growing list of addresses, a stack of floor plans, and a recurring theme. No one saw him enter. No one saw him leave. And yet, everyone knew he'd been there. If you build a web as wide as Peter Chong's, eventually someone's going to try pulling on a thread. The FBI calls them witnesses. Peter calls them echoes. People who heard too much, helped too little, or suddenly found themselves caught between loyalty and self-preservation. And one by one, these echoes begin to fade. Not all vanish in dramatic fashion. There are no car bombs or body dumps in Peter's world. He's not a gangster from the movies. No, it happens more like paper dissolving in water. Quiet, untraceable. It begins with one of the junior associates from his immigration network, a clerk named Lynn. She handled paperwork, answered phones, occasionally typed letters for clients she never met. One day, she's approached by a federal agent outside her apartment. Just questions, they say. Routine. She listens, nods, says she'll think about it. The next morning, she doesn't show up to work. By the afternoon, her desk is empty, except for a red envelope with a peach blossom sticker. No money, no message, just the envelope. She sends a resignation email later that week, moves to Las Vegas. No forwarding address. The feds take notice. They try again. A man who worked in one of Peter's seafood facilities. Someone who had access to shipping manifests that didn't quite add up. He agrees to meet with investigators. The meeting is scheduled for a Tuesday. On Monday, he's offered a job at a port company in Vancouver. Double salary, benefits, no interview required. He takes it. Another name off the list. This pattern repeats itself. Dozens of small attempts to reach Peter's inner circle, to tug at the seams of his world. And each time, the seams don't fray. They vanish because Peter doesn't silence people. He makes them invisible. Mainstream historical fact. Organized crime investigations often stall due to witness intimidation, not always through violence, but via community pressure, isolation, or strategic exile. In many tight-knit immigrant communities, the unspoken threat of shunning or career sabotage was enough to keep mouths shut indefinitely. And Peter, he perfects that art. He doesn't need to threaten. He just withholds. A merchant who considers cooperating suddenly finds his supply orders delayed. A building inspector who once looked the other way discovers his daughter's scholarship mysteriously revoked. A young man promised sponsorship for his cousin abroad is told the paperwork is no longer possible. It's subtle, elegant, devastating. Many people still think Peter used fear to control Chinatown. But so, what do you think? Is it fear if no one ever says the word? One agent on Peter's case begins to document what he calls the pattern of erasure. A witness surfaces. They hesitate. Something happens. They disappear, voluntarily. He maps out over a dozen of these cases, none of them illegal, all of them frustrating. And then there's the journalist. A local reporter, Elaine Wu, begins digging into Peter's immigration operation. She's young, ambitious, and sharp. At first, it's small things. A profile on Chinatown nonprofits. A curious line in a city finance report. A few too similar donation patterns. She follows the trail, begins asking around. At first, people are polite, cautious. Then they grow cold, stops returning calls. One source calls her back a week after agreeing to meet and says simply, "Don't." She writes anyway, drafts a story, sends a fact-checking request to a seafood business tied to Peter. The next day she receives flowers, a white orchid, no note. She never publishes the piece. 2 months later, she transfers to the arts and culture desk, writes about lantern festivals. She says nothing publicly, but colleagues notice her jump at shadows for months afterward. Peter, of course, says nothing. Publicly, he's hosting a fundraiser for storm relief victims in southern China, pledging $10,000 and praising the courage of first responders. And yet, agents notice he's changed his schedule. Fewer public appearances, shorter meetings. When he does speak, it's often through others. Young, well-groomed men and women who carry folders, smile politely, and leave no personal trace. The Bureau tries one last push, this time through financial pressure. They investigate a warehouse Peter is rumored to use as a cash hub. Surveillance, wiretaps a planted informant. But when they raid it, they find costumes, traditional lion dance gear, drums, fabric scraps, a sign that reads, "Youth Performance Storage, do not discard." They can't prove anything. The informant disappears. Later, the building's lease is transferred to a church. One agent, in frustration, mutters, "It's like every move we make, he's already rehearsed it 3 times. And maybe he has, because Peter isn't just staying ahead of the law, he's neutralizing its tools. Without witnesses, you have no leverage. Without testimony, you have no case. Without fear, you have nothing. And in Peter's world, fear isn't loud. It's absence. It's the letter that never arrives. The phone call that's never returned. The man who used to walk these streets, who everyone used to know, but whose name no one remembers saying. That's power. That's Peter. There's a saying in Chinatown that floats from tea house to alley, from grandmother's lips to the ears of curious newcomers. If you want to know what Peter Chong is doing, watch what his enemies stop doing. And in the spring of 1994, something strange happens. His enemies go quiet. Not dead, not imprisoned, just absent. One Tong-affiliated crew that once tried to push low-grade heroin through Peter's gambling corridor closes up shop and relocates to Los Angeles. Their leader buys a small nail salon in Monterey Park and swears he's retired. Another rival operation that specialized in document fraud across Oakland suddenly shutters. The storefront becomes a dentist's office within a week. Peter doesn't claim victory. He never waves flags. He simply begins occupying the vacuum. And while the FBI continues spinning in procedural circles, something even more significant unfolds behind the curtain. An insider flips. Not a lieutenant, not a runner, a lawyer, a real one, with a bar number, with framed degrees, with just enough guilt and fear to push him over the edge. His name, carefully redacted from every known report, is whispered only as Mr. Lau's friend. But the Bureau knows who he is. He doesn't come in with drama. No plea deals, no wiretaps sewn into briefcases. Just a quiet lunch with a federal contact in Berkeley, where he says 10 words that will define the next year of surveillance. Peter doesn't hide. He just never repeats a mistake. And then he talks. He doesn't give everything. He can't. He's not part of the inner circle, but what he does offer is crucial. The names of shell companies Peter uses for immigration flows, the law offices that process forms under different non-profit umbrellas, the 1 degree removed network, consultants, real estate agents, notaries. He explains that Peter's empire isn't criminal in the traditional sense. It's administrative. It's forms, layers, clerks who don't ask questions, cultural centers that operate 23 hours a day but file taxes as volunteer run. It's bureaucracy weaponized. One mainstream historical fact: some of the most enduring criminal enterprises in U.S. history operated by embedding themselves in municipal and federal systems, exploiting gaps in regulation, feasting on red tape, and thriving in the liminal space between government function and private transaction. Peter was no exception, but he took it further. According to the lawyer, Peter had begun shifting his entire operation into legitimacy, piece by piece, no more off-the-books gambling. The games now happened under the guise of private club nights, hosted by associations with published member lists and annual dues. No more cash-only fish markets. The new payment systems included receipts, loyalty cards, even EBT integration. No more suspicious visa petitions. Now, they flowed through cultural partnerships with organizations in Singapore and Taiwan, complete with press releases, printed newsletters, and photos of Peter cutting ribbons next to city council members. He was laundering not just money but intent. The FBI took it all in. They doubled their efforts, poured resources into financial audits, wiretap expansion, surveillance rotation. But Peter, he seemed untouched, at least until a crack finally opened. One of Peter's younger aides, too loud, too eager, slipped up. The aide filed a business application for a Chinatown logistics firm that listed a non-existent board member and a ghost address. It wouldn't have mattered, except the paperwork referenced a shipping manifest that had triggered a customs flag 3 months earlier. A DEA analyst noticed, passed it to an FBI contact. The paper trail began to curl upward, and at the top, one name appeared on a transfer authorization form: Peter Chong. A real name, no shell, no alias. The Bureau moved fast, too fast. Before they could build a prosecutable case, word got out. A call from a clerk to a friend. A whispered warning at a family dinner. It doesn't matter who spoke. What matters is Peter knew. And that's when everything shifted. One night, he's seen dining at his usual spot on Washington Street. Roast duck, hot tea, 2 guests. The next morning, his office is locked. His phone disconnected. By evening, his apartment is empty. FBI agents arrive with a warrant. They find a perfectly made bed, a refrigerator full of untouched food, and a receipt for a one-way flight from Los Angeles to Hong Kong, dated 2 days in the future. But Peter never boards that flight. Because Peter never flew from Los Angeles, he flew from San Diego, under a different name, using a passport tied to a Singaporean business visa issued 4 years prior. The one agents missed because it had never been used. Until now, he lands in Macau. Just like that, he's gone. And the Bureau? They're left with paperwork. They raid offices. They subpoena accountants. They freeze bank accounts and detain mid-level players who say, again and again, I only ever spoke to his assistant. I didn't know Peter was involved. He just introduced me to someone else. The empire slows, not collapses, just slows, because Peter wasn't holding it up. He'd built it so that it wouldn't fall, even if he vanished. Many people still think this was cowardice, that when the heat got too high, Peter ran. But so what do you think? When a man walks off the board, but the game keeps going, was he ever really playing by your rules? And in Chinatown, the back doors stay closed. The tea shops stay quiet. And Peter Chong's name? It's spoken less, not from fear, from design. Macau greets Peter with fog rolling in off the Pearl River Delta, and neon lights blinking like half-forgotten promises. It's not his first time here, but this time, he's not a visitor. He's a ghost in reverse, someone everyone remembers before he arrives. He touches down quietly, not on a commercial flight, but via charter. Not alone either, though his companions disappear into the mist as quickly as they appeared. The passport he uses bears a different name. The customs official nods him through. There's no hesitation, and just like that, Peter Chong becomes someone else. But his moves are no less deliberate. Macau in the mid-1990s is changing, transforming from a gambling backwater into a gleaming monument to global money. The casinos, once dusty and parochial, are preparing for international investment. Triads jostle for space alongside businessmen in tailored Italian suits. The air smells like ambition and cigarettes. Peter steps into this moment like a man returning to a room he helped design. He doesn't announce himself, but within days, he's seen in the lobby of a major hotel. Never gambling, always watching. He attends a dinner hosted by a Hong Kong property magnate. No photos are taken, but his seat at the table is at the center. He's not laying low, he's laying foundation. The FBI scrambles. They confirm he's overseas, but there's no extradition treaty with Macau. The best they can do is monitor financial flows, hope for a mistake. But Peter isn't careless. He's cleaner now than ever. What follows is a chapter of whispers, sightings, bank records that hint at shell firms linked to casinos, foundations with vague mandates for cultural preservation and international outreach, a consulting firm that exists only on a single floor of a skyscraper with no receptionist. Peter doesn't run operations. He connects them. He becomes a broker of influence. He arranges meetings between old Hong Kong families and new mainland investors, introduces Taiwanese businessmen to Southeast Asian casinos seeking legitimacy. He speaks little during these meetings, sometimes not at all, but everyone listens when he clears his throat. One mainstream historical fact: during this era, Macau was a hotspot for triad influence. Gangs such as 14K and Sun Yian were heavily embedded in the casino industry, often acting as junket operators, recruiting high-rolling gamblers, extending credit, and enforcing debt collection through violence or threat. Peter doesn't become a junket boss. He becomes the man the junket bosses ask for advice. He's not interested in turf wars. He's not here to hustle gamblers or strong-arm pit bosses. He's here for the structure, the flow of money, the movement of trust, the openings between legality and opportunity. He buys an apartment, not under his name, of course, overlooking the harbor. Simple, clean, the sort of place that doesn't draw attention but offers a wide view of everything. There's a doorman who always nods twice, a housekeeper who changes the flowers every Thursday. No one speaks his name out loud, and back in the States, his empire shuffles, adjusts. Associates restructure businesses. Some lay low, some step forward, taking more visible leadership roles, but no one fills the space he left, because Peter hasn't left, he's just relocated the throne. Many people still think Peter disappeared to avoid accountability. But so what do you think? If a man vanishes and still controls outcomes, did he really vanish at all? He communicates rarely. When he does, it's through intermediaries, never the same one twice. Messages come wrapped in legitimacy, legal documents, donation acknowledgments, invitations to conferences that don't exist. He begins working with a Southeast Asian philanthropic trust. On paper, just another name on a board of directors. But that trust soon partners with a casino development group that acquires land in Cambodia. And guess who happens to recommend the lawyer who processes the deal? Peter's fingerprints are never on the contracts, but his breath is in the margins. Back in Macau, he walks at night, always alone, always with purpose. The casino security teams know to step aside. He doesn't flash credentials. He doesn't need to. There's one photo, rare, blurry, of Peter standing on a rooftop bar, drink in hand, city lights glowing behind him. He's speaking to a man whose face is turned away, but whose silhouette matches a known political figure from Manila. The photo never goes public. The photographer? He later deletes his entire archive and moves into wedding shoots. Peter's presence begins to shift regional dynamics. A known fixer in Bangkok suddenly finds himself elevated to consultant for an international trade group. A family in Jakarta sees charges dropped against their shipping business after donating to an arts organization in Macau, one that Peter helped advise. It's not crime, it's conversion. He's turning the influence he built in Chinatown into currency across Asia. Still, his past isn't done with him. The FBI, frustrated by their lack of progress, begins floating diplomatic pressure. Calls are made, memos are exchanged. Interpol is looped in. A file lands on a desk in Singapore, another in Kuala Lumpur. But Peter's name isn't the only one in that file. There are others, names with deeper roots, thicker protection, and someone, somewhere, decides not to move. Because removing Peter might cause a rip, and no one wants to be the one who tears the silk. Eventually, The U.S. issues an indictment in absentia, visa fraud, conspiracy, laundering, but the papers never reach him. And even if they did, he would simply nod and say, "That was a different man, a different passport, a different country." He'd smile. He always smiles. And yet, in Macau, there's one room where he doesn't. A private study in the back of a restaurant that no longer serves food. He goes there sometimes, sits, reads, says nothing. The waiter knows to bring tea but not ask questions. Inside that room, on the wall, hangs a single photo. Chinatown, 1987. A lion dance. A blur of red and gold. In the corner, just barely visible, Peter Chong watching. Because even now, with oceans between them, he remembers the back streets, the whispers, the deals made over soup and silence. And so do they. The morning after Peter Chong slips through the cracks of U.S. jurisdiction, a conference call buzzes to life in an FBI field office. It's tense, dry, full of federal language and legalese. But beneath it all is a quiet, collective truth none of the agents want to say aloud. We lost him. No one says it in those words. Instead, they talk about international complications and extradition unlikelihood. They use phrases like resource realignment and refocusing on domestic assets. But the meaning is clear. Peter is gone, and yet his fingerprints linger. Not the kind dust reveals, the kind that show up in behavior, in flows, in the way people speak more softly in certain rooms. Even when he's no longer in the country, the Bureau doesn't shut the case. It reclassifies it. The file moves into a different cabinet under a new heading. Fugitive status, international watch list. Meanwhile, Peter is watching too, just from farther away. And what he sees is what he planned for. A slow tightening around his old network. Subpoenas, audits, visits from serious-looking men in quiet suits. A few of his former aides are questioned. One or two are indicted, but they knew the rules. They had distance, legal buffers. Nothing leads directly to Peter, because Peter never operated from the center. He was always on the rim, circling, guiding, touching the wheel without leaving his fingerprints on the spokes. And now, in Macau, he begins his next evolution. The move isn't into hiding. It's into higher ground. He's done with seafood, done with visas and gambling dens and tea house politics. The new game is international, corporate, wrapped in clean contracts and multilingual press releases. It starts with a consulting firm, one that doesn't advertise, doesn't recruit. It's referral only, which is a fancy way of saying invisible to the wrong people. It helps facilitate cross-border business development between Chinese investors and Southeast Asian infrastructure projects. Bridges, rail, logistics hubs, real deals, real money. But the firm's deeper service, never spoken, is connection. Soft introductions, quiet mediation, risk assessment. Not in numbers, but in people. Peter doesn't run the meetings. He sits in the second row. He leaves before the photos. But his name opens doors. Or rather, unlocks them. One mainstream historical fact. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, Macau underwent a sweeping transformation as international casino conglomerates poured money into infrastructure, real estate, and finance. Behind many of these transitions were shadow brokers, former triad affiliates, business facilitators, and politically connected middlemen who shaped policy behind the scenes. Peter fits this mold with uncanny precision. He doesn't gamble, but he now owns a portion of a gaming advisory firm. On paper, it provides staffing and event planning. In reality, it's a gatekeeper, deciding which junket operators get access to high-stakes VIP rooms and which ones quietly vanish from the scene. There's one story of a mainland tycoon who loses $8 million in a single week. He storms out, demanding retribution, threatening to cut ties with the casino group. Peter, it's said, offers him a glass of plum wine and a question. Is your anger worth more than your next visa approval? The tycoon finishes the drink, leaves in silence, returns 2 months later with a new line of credit. Peter doesn't enforce rules. He recommends them, and the world rearranges. Even the triads give him space. No formal alliance is ever declared. No tattoos, no pledges. But the old 14K boys know better than to touch his clients. And when asked why, one of them allegedly replies, because you don't kick the floor you're standing on. Back in the States, the FBI tries to mount extradition pressure through diplomatic back channels. A delegation visits Hong Kong. Questions are asked, gently. Suggestions are made. But the reply is always the same. Peter Chong? He's not a criminal here. He holds a valid business visa, pays his taxes, donates to a cultural initiative supporting language education. His consulting firm even sponsors a youth chess tournament in the Philippines. His name remains on watch lists, but it drifts further down, past louder fugitives, past more urgent threats. Many people still think Peter escaped, that he ran from justice. But so what do you think? If a man is never tried, never convicted, and still walks through the lobby of a 5-star hotel with his head high, is he fleeing, or is he simply continuing? A former FBI analyst once likened Peter to a river with no mouth. You see the ripples, you see the influence, but you can never trace it to a source, because Peter made sure there wasn't one, and those who knew him best, they no longer receive calls, no coded messages, no red envelopes, just nothing. One former associate finds a postcard in his mailbox 6 months after Peter vanishes. No return address, just a photo of a Macau street at dusk, and a single sentence written in Peter's handwriting. No need to worry. Some things are better tended from above. It's not signed, but it doesn't need to be. By now, everyone knows his voice without the echo. The US government doesn't forget Peter Chong. Not exactly. But as years pass and investigations evolve, he begins to feel like something else. A remnant from a different era. A cautionary tale whispered during onboarding at federal agencies. If you're tracking a clean operator, ask yourself, is this a Chong problem? The file remains open. The photos still sit in folders. The pins on the maps haven't moved, but the phone calls slow. The urgency fades, because Peter isn't sending faxes or phone threats. He's not running from extradition. He's just untouchable by design. And back in Macau, he's building again. Only now the blocks are taller. It begins with policy dinners. Events that aren't publicized, but are attended by high-ranking members of local governments, former diplomats, ex-banking officials, not the ones who scream influence, but the ones who whisper it into law. Peter never speaks publicly, but he's always seated in the second-best chair, close enough to listen, far enough to deny. He brings nothing but a small notebook and a silver pen. He writes sparingly. He remembers everything. And when someone stumbles in a conversation, maybe about international trade loopholes or offshore financial protections, Peter leans forward and offers a suggestion that sounds more like a proverb than advice. People listen. One mainstream historical fact. In the early 2000s, Macau became a magnet not just for gambling revenue, but for international finance schemes, real estate laundering, tax arbitrage, visa investment programs. This surge of capital required local governments to streamline oversight, often opening gaps that were easily exploited by those with connections. Peter understood the shape of power better than anyone. He begins advising quietly on visa programs that exchange foreign investment for residency. The money comes from everywhere: Shanghai, Manila, Sydney, Vancouver. Sometimes the name on the wire is familiar. Sometimes it's new. It doesn't matter. Peter's team knows how to route it. By now, his organization doesn't use names. It uses positions. The client, the port contact, our cultural friend. The fewer specifics, the cleaner the ledger. And then comes the real pivot, Southeast Asia. Peter begins appearing in Bangkok, in Jakarta, in Ho Chi Minh City, not in public, but in building registries, in paperwork, in whispers. He's facilitating infrastructure deals, logistics chains, digital development partnerships, consulting for groups that claim to be green tech, but whose only website is a broken WordPress template. Still, contracts are signed, money moves, and governments look the other way. Many people still think Peter's empire was a relic of 1980s Chinatown crime. But so what do you think? If a man builds a second life around clean influence, and it grows larger than the first, which one is the mask? One operation stands out, a Macau-based foundation. Peter advises partners with a Laotian construction firm. They jointly fund a heritage resort in a remote border region. No tourists arrive, no reviews are posted. Yet the property remains booked out month after month. Every quarter, new investment is injected. Quiet, seamless. It's a financial greenhouse. Money flows in, blooms, and becomes clean. The FBI, still tracking wire transfers, notes that several former Peter-linked shell companies resurface in Vietnam, now under different names. One agent calls it the reforestation of an old forest, but jurisdiction fails them again. The banks are Southeast Asian. The owners are offshore. The paper trail is thick, legitimate, impenetrable. And Peter? He's in Singapore 1 month, Bangkok the next. Always in the background. Always attending events under someone else's invitation. At a cultural symposium in Jakarta, he sits next to a tech mogul accused of crypto laundering. The photo circulates briefly, then disappears. No one comments. Peter's name isn't mentioned in the event's press materials. At a diplomatic dinner in Phnom Penh, he's photographed handing a donation envelope to a government minister. The caption identifies him only as an international businessman and supporter of regional education initiatives. Even Interpol begins to lose interest, because Peter no longer violates the law. He operates beneath its reach. His consulting work is clean. His donations are real. His team includes compliance officers and attorneys who file everything properly, pay taxes early, and ensure transparency that blinds you with bureaucracy. But the most powerful tool he's cultivated? Time. Because over time, memory softens. Threats lose shape. Faces retire. Agents get reassigned. Senators shift priorities. And somewhere along the way, Peter goes from target to case study, a man who didn't outrun justice. He simply waited until justice ran out of breath. Back in Chinatown, the elders have changed. New shopkeepers don't know his name. But the old ones, they remember. They remember the tea, the back rooms, the man who asked only once, and then never needed to ask again. There's a mural recently painted near a side street off Grant Avenue. It shows dragons, lanterns, and nameless faces in suits. No one claims the artist, but in the far right corner, just above a painted staircase, is a shadow. No eyes, no mouth, just a silhouette in a charcoal suit. They say it's nobody, but some know better. They call it a life of silk and smoke, not because it's soft or intangible, but because it glides. It bends without breaking. It's elegant without drawing attention. And in Peter Chong's case, it's intentional. Every step, every appearance, every silence. By the year 2000, Peter's life in Southeast Asia has taken on a rhythm that no longer resembles exile. It's not hiding. It's pivot. He now lives between 3 countries, Macau, Singapore, and Malaysia. Each base serves a purpose. Macau is the pulse. Singapore is the Polish. Malaysia, especially Kuala Lumpur, is the buffer, the in-between. He doesn't own properties in his name, but his laundry is folded weekly in 3 different cities. In Singapore, he's on the advisory board of a philanthropic education group with ties to both Chinese diaspora communities and American universities. He's quoted, anonymously, in a South China Morning Post article about regional growth strategies. The reporter never sees him, but the quote lands perfectly. Real stability happens quietly. You never know its name until it leaves. In Kuala Lumpur, he's known to certain hoteliers, the kind of man who checks in under an alias, but is always upgraded. He meets guests who arrive in black cars, enter through staff hallways, and leave without tipping. The meetings are short, productive. What's being traded isn't drugs, guns, or visas anymore. It's compliance. Peter now specializes in arrangements for those with too much visibility and not enough leverage. His value isn't in what he can offer directly. It's in who he can put in the room. Quietly. One conversation at a time. Mainstream historical fact. In the early 2000s, Southeast Asia saw a rise in informal power brokers, consultants, former politicians, and financial intermediaries who helped multinational corporations and oligarchs navigate everything from tax shelters to infrastructure bids. They rarely appeared on record, but they shaped billion-dollar decisions with a phone call. Peter fits into this class of shadow diplomat perfectly. His operations now function more like a think tank, small, elite, and exquisitely hard to trace. He no longer micromanages, he curates. Each city he operates in has a point person, chosen not for loyalty alone, but for discretion. Some are former professors, some are retired bankers. One is a novelist who never publishes but is often seen scribbling notes outside high-end cafes. His core team communicates through layers, voice calls routed through encrypted apps, physical ledgers stored in safety deposit boxes under dormant LLCs, and the occasional personal visit from Peter himself. When he does appear, it's with no fanfare, no entourage, just a notebook and a question. What are we solving? He never says fix, never says help, always solve. That distinction is critical because Peter doesn't deal in favors anymore. He deals in structure, the kind of structure that turns temporary advantages into long-term leverage. He facilitates the quiet sale of a logistics company in Da Nang to a Singaporean holding firm whose shareholders trace back to Peter's old seafood partner. He arranges for a failed shipping project in Indonesia to be repurposed as a green corridor, unlocking international grants. He introduces an investment group from Australia to a media startup in Thailand that doubles as an influence network during elections. None of this touches his name, but every deal, every win, adds to his growing legend. One built not on muscle, but mapping. And yet, the air around him changes. He grows more careful, not because law enforcement is closing in, but because the market is shifting. Criminal empires are being replaced by digital ones, crypto, data, influence operations. Peter is a master of the old world. Favors, rooms, silence. Now, he begins learning the new one. He consults with a cybersecurity team in Singapore, funds a fintech accelerator in Penang, begins mentoring a group of young operators who've never set foot in Chinatown but know who he is by reputation. One of them calls him the analog ghost. Peter laughs, corrects him. I'm not analog, I'm just invisible on purpose. Back in the United States, a new generation of agents reviews the Peter Chong file. The older names have retired. The newer ones read transcripts, try to update the case. But all they have are threads, nothing to pull. The most recent entry in his file is a flagged wire transfer from a Malaysian charity to a Hong Kong publishing firm. It's clean, legal. But someone scribbles a note on the margin. Smells like Chong, and still no action. Because what would they charge? He has no outstanding warrant in Southeast Asia, no open businesses in his name. His visas are valid, his taxes, on paper, are flawless. Peter isn't running anymore. He's reframed. Even among his former peers, there's awe. Men who once feared his influence now ask their sons to study his style. Women who once warned against speaking his name now use him as an example of what discipline looks like. There's a famous story told by a hotel concierge in Singapore. Peter enters. Wears a blue suit, no tie, asks for a corner room facing the sea. The concierge asks, "Business or pleasure?" Peter smiles and says, "Both. But you'll never be able to tell which is which." He stays for 3 nights. Leaves without checking out. The room is paid for. The sheets untouched. Just one item left behind. A folded page from a finance magazine, circled in red. An article titled "The Quiet Power of Unseen Influence." No signature. Just a small mark in the corner. Black pawn. And in every city Peter touches, that mark remains. On buildings, in back rooms, on the lips of men in suits who never speak above a whisper. He's not retired. He's not in hiding. He's just operating at a higher altitude, and from that view, everything looks exactly as he designed it. Backroom diplomacy has never looked so civilized. By 2001, Peter Chong is no longer a mystery to those who matter. He's a known quantity, a trusted equation, the man you call when you're on the verge of getting everything or losing it all. He doesn't have a business card, doesn't need one. When a Malaysian telecom group faces regulatory gridlock in Laos, they don't call their legal team. They ask, "Can Peter help us talk to the right people?" No one asks how he does it. They just know that within 6 weeks, permits are approved, language is softened, and the minister who once refused to attend the meetings now arrives early with his cuffs buttoned and a gift in hand. Peter doesn't appear in photos, but he's always nearby, at a table in the same building, on the rooftop 2 floors above, or simply mentioned in passing, like a ghost you thank just in case it's listening. Back in Macau, he remains low-key. He's no longer the man who walks the casino floors, but the man the floors are quietly redesigned for. A change in layout here, a new licensing partner there. His influence arrives before he does, and lingers long after. And when governments want something delicate handled, say, brokering a deal between 2 rival factions of investors, or smoothing over the inconvenient optics of an opaque transaction, Peter becomes the bridge. Not the hammer, not the sword, the bridge. He can speak 5 languages, but these days, he mostly uses silence. A pause, a glance, a perfectly timed sip of tea that somehow says, "You should think that through again." And they do. One mainstream historical fact. By the early 2000s, many Southeast Asian nations were undergoing rapid modernization while also grappling with deeply entrenched patronage networks. Progress was often contingent not on laws, but on access. Relationships brokered behind closed doors by those who understood both the culture and the calculus. Peter, of course, excels in both. He's now loosely affiliated with 5 foundations. Each has a different mission: rural education, historical preservation, cross-border innovation, youth diplomacy, and digital ethics. All clean, all funded. None explicitly mention him, but their board members, assistants, and guest speakers all have one thing in common. At some point in their careers, they've been helped by Peter Chong. One regional ambassador calls him a cultural translator for ambition. Another refers to him simply as the man you don't say no to because you never heard him ask. He's redefined the favor. It's no longer about power. It's about easing resistance. You don't owe him money. You owe him progress. And that's a currency harder to repay. Peter's meetings are curated events. A walk through a museum where a conversation just happens to begin beside an exhibit on shared regional futures. A tea tasting in a rooftop garden that casually turns into a discussion about port access and third-party logistics networks. No notes, no summaries, but afterward, papers are drafted, deals are signed, and Peter, he's on to the next city. In one documented case, though still technically classified, a U.S. trade delegation traveling through Bangkok in 2002 receives an anonymous tip that a former Chinese-American community leader would be willing to advise on regional sensitivities regarding land use. A quiet lunch is arranged. No official name is shared. But later that month, the delegation successfully brokers a deal previously thought stalled for 2 years. The note left on the table after the meeting, harmony begins where suspicion ends, written in cursive, unsigned. Peter has become a diplomatic instrument, used but never claimed. And still he watches the West, through press clippings, through whispers, through proxies. He knows that in certain government circles, his name still circulates, that his legacy in San Francisco hasn't vanished, only cooled. Occasionally, an analyst dusts off the Chong file, runs a check, finds nothing. The last official movement on his U.S. case is a request for extradition clarification sent to Singapore. It's stamped reviewed, no action, and returned with a polite, bureaucratic footnote. No current basis for extradition exists. Peter smiles when he hears this, because he didn't just escape, he outgrew the net. Back in Chinatown, San Francisco is changing. The old tea shops shutter. New faces walk the streets. Kids now speak more English than Cantonese. The lion dancers rehearse less often, but Peter's name remains in the walls, in the cracks between businesses that somehow always find funding, in the scholarship fund that keeps growing quietly, its checks signed by a trust based in Macau. And once in a while, during a festival, someone will ask the oldest man in the room, "Whatever happened to Peter?" And the old man, without turning his head, will just say, "He's still where he needs to be." Because even now, Peter's diplomacy isn't just about bridging countries or economies. It's about shaping memory, curating how people remember what never made the news. He's not forgotten. He's engraved. Like calligraphy on a door frame no one notices until it starts raining. It's always a whisper that gets him closer. A whisper from a man tired of his government. A whisper from a woman whose organization is losing relevance. A whisper from a banker, a minister, a publisher, each with too many obligations and not enough options. Peter Chong doesn't chase opportunity anymore. It finds him, and by 2003, it finds him through a man called the informant. That's what the files call him, never by name. But his intel sets off a series of events that nearly reel Peter back into American jurisdiction. The informant is a former associate, not one of Peter's core men, more like a distant satellite. He worked logistics, had just enough access to know who was moving what, but never why. For years, he profited quietly, took his cut, never caused problems until he did. Why he flipped isn't clear. Maybe it was greed, maybe loneliness. Maybe he just got tired of bowing without being acknowledged. What is clear is that he walked into a U.S. consulate in Malaysia one afternoon, requested a private meeting, and said the words no agent thought they'd hear again. "I can bring you Peter Chong." The agents didn't laugh, didn't scoff. They leaned in, and for the first time in nearly a decade, the case reopened. The informant talked, gave names, locations, business structures, a new shell company in Phnom Penh, a meeting place in Hanoi. An encrypted folder passed between two women in matching scarves at an art gala in Manila. Everything he said smelled like Peter, and it all led to Macau, specifically to a boutique casino on the Cotai Strip, smaller than the Giants, but rumored to be a laundering hub for old triad families. The informant said Peter wasn't running the place, but he was guiding it, steering investments, vetting clients, setting policies with a smile and a proverb, so the Bureau reached out, quietly, through the proper channels. The Department of State stepped in. A request was made. What they wanted wasn't a raid, not yet. They wanted a sting. The plan was simple. Use a joint task force between Interpol and local financial crimes authorities to bait Peter into overseeing a deal involving a US-linked shell company. If he put his signature anywhere, they'd move. And for a while, it looked like it might work. The shell company was created. The bait was laid. Peter was briefed, via intermediaries as always. He showed interest. He even sent a message. The vessel must be watertight before it sails. The FBI read it as a maybe. They prepared. Surveillance was established. Satellite records. Hotel logs. Even facial recognition sweeps in high-end shopping districts. Peter was seen once. Blurry image. Glasses. Clean suit. Standing beneath a stone archway near a private club. The timestamp matched the date of a supposed prep meeting with one of the shell company's operators. They were close, or so they thought, because the next morning every thread evaporated. The operator vanished. Passport stamped through Cambodia. The shell company closed its bank account. The informant? Gone. Left his apartment keys on the desk. Last seen boarding a ferry with no listed destination. Peter, silent. The agents in Macau were furious. Some said someone tipped him off. Others said he'd never really intended to show, that the whole thing had been a test. Many people still think the sting failed because of bureaucratic missteps. But so what do you think? If a man lets you get that close, isn't he just measuring your reach? After the sting collapses, Peter shifts again. Not visibly, not urgently, but subtly. He begins consolidating. No more meetings in hotels, now it's embassies, cultural institutions, public-private forums with titles like Regional Stability Through Business Integration. He brings in younger faces, trained voices, associates who've never seen Chinatown, who refer to Peter as Mr. C, and only communicate via paper notes and face-to-face meetings. He stops traveling as often. Instead, others come to him, sometimes under the pretext of education partnerships, sometimes media conferences. Once, a shipping summit that mysteriously had no guest list, and still he watches. He keeps tabs on the U.S. Department of Justice, on international asset seizure trends, on regional cybersecurity policies. Not because he's scared, because he understands the weather. He feels when the temperature changes. At a quiet dinner in Kuala Lumpur, a banker asks him what he thinks about the future of offshore banking. Peter pauses, sips his broth, smiles. The safest place is the one no one notices. That year, 3 of his old companies are dissolved. 2 new ones appear. Their CEOs are young women with degrees from British universities and no known connection to organized crime. But when they make decisions, they do it Peter's way. Even the informal codes remain. If an email arrives with a chess piece in the subject line, it's read first. If a courier arrives with a purple envelope, the recipient steps out of the room to open it in private. These aren't rules Peter imposed. They're habits he left behind. Like muscle memory in an organization that no longer needs his physical presence to function. Back in the US, an internal memo circulates. Subject, Chong Peter, reclassification. The document suggests shifting Peter from active fugitive to strategic observation category, a polite way of saying, we're watching, but we know we won't catch him. The final line of the memo reads, Consider all future encounters as intelligence-gathering opportunities, not apprehension attempts. Translation? He wins. And Peter? He doesn't gloat. He doesn't toast. He just writes one more note in his notebook, then turns the page. Because to him, the sting was never about the risk. It was a pulse check. And from what he can tell, he's still 3 moves ahead. The pulse check confirms what Peter already knows. His game has changed, but the board remains his. He is no longer simply a Chinatown figure or a fugitive slipping through cracks. He has become a global architect, designing flows of influence that no single government can contain. His network spans continents, from the back alleys of San Francisco to the high-rises of Singapore, from the casinos of Macau to the boardrooms of Jakarta. But while his reach grows, his footprint shrinks. He trades the chaos of streets for the calm of corridors. Where once he might have been found in a smoky back room, he now appears in international conferences, seated beside diplomats and CEOs, exchanging handshakes and nods that carry the weight of entire industries. One mainstream historical fact: the early 21st century witnessed the rise of transnational crime groups morphing into sophisticated business entities, often blurring the lines between legitimate commerce and illicit activity. They engaged in political lobbying, philanthropy, and corporate partnerships to shield their operations and legitimize their influence. Peter exemplifies this transformation. He invests in startups focused on blockchain and fintech, companies that promise transparency but deliver complexity. He funds environmental NGOs that champion sustainable development in areas where his network operates. At a gala in Singapore, he listens as a young entrepreneur pitches a plan for a digital identity platform. Peter smiles and offers a few carefully measured words about trust and security. He knows that in a world built on data, control of information is power. Yet, despite this evolution, he keeps one foot firmly planted in tradition. Every year, without fail, Peter sends a handwritten letter to the oldest temple in San Francisco's Chinatown, thanking the caretakers for preserving the heritage he came from. The letter is never publicized. It arrives quietly in a sealed envelope, folded with the precision of a craftsman. It reads, "Our past guides us, even when we move forward into the unknown. His legacy, much like his life, is a balance of old and new. Meanwhile, new players arise in the shadows Peter once ruled. Young men and women, savvy with technology and hungry for influence, navigate digital platforms and encrypted networks. Some seek to replicate his success. Others aim to dismantle it. But Peter remains a ghost in their system, a benchmark, a legend. Law enforcement continues to track the ripple effects of his empire. Financial anomalies, unexplained wealth flows, subtle shifts in regional power dynamics. They analyze data, issue alerts, and sometimes make arrests. But the core remains elusive. Peter's influence is like the tide, felt everywhere but seen nowhere. And in private moments, those who once knew him whisper, "He wasn't a man you chased. He was a storm you waited out." A quiet storm, a force of nature wrapped in a silk suit. He doesn't seek headlines. He shapes history, and that perhaps is his greatest victory. As the new millennium progresses, Peter Chong's empire becomes more than a network. It becomes a legacy. He begins mentoring a select group of protégés, young, multilingual, globally minded individuals who understand the art of invisibility and the power of silence. They are taught the lessons Peter learned the hard way: how to build bridges where walls exist, how to leverage cultural nuance, and how to wield influence without ever needing a spotlight. These protégés spread like seeds across Asia, North America, and Europe, each planting new nodes in Peter's web, adapting to the digital age with tools Peter never had in his early days. Peter watches, advises, but never commands. His power now flows through these channels, amplified but unseen. One such protégé, a young woman from Vancouver, manages investments that appear mundane but funnel capital into emerging markets ripe for expansion. Another, based in Singapore, runs a philanthropic foundation with quiet ties to political figures, promoting initiatives that align with Peter's vision of influence. Yet, Peter remains deeply connected to Chinatown. Not the old Chinatown of faded signs and narrow alleys, but the new Chinatown of entrepreneurs, artists, and tech startups. He sponsors cultural festivals that blend tradition with innovation, supports scholarship programs for youth pursuing international business, and maintains a modest office in a quiet building where a single jade dragon rests atop his desk. Though he rarely appears publicly, those who cross his path describe him as calm, deliberate, and profoundly observant. A man whose presence commands attention without words. Mainstream historical fact. In the early 21st century, diasporic communities increasingly balanced preserving cultural heritage with embracing globalization, often led by figures who bridged traditional values and modern opportunities. Peter embodies this balance. He understands that influence today isn't wielded by force, but by networks, complex, adaptive, and resilient. And as the world grows more interconnected, his web becomes more intricate. The FBI's files on Peter grow thicker, filled with reports of financial transactions, international partnerships, and whispered intelligence. But concrete evidence remains elusive. Peter's story continues to be one of shadows and subtleties. His empire, a testament to the power of patience, adaptability, and silent authority. And though the years pass, one truth remains clear. In the game of influence, the quietest move can be the most decisive. The digital age dawns, and with it, a new set of challenges and opportunities. Peter Chong's empire, rooted in tradition and discretion, must now navigate a world transformed by the internet, mobile communication, and instant information. No longer are deals made solely over tea in quiet back rooms or whispered in shadowed corridors. Now data flows like water, fast, wide, and unforgiving. Peter adapts. He surrounds himself with cyber experts, privacy consultants, and cryptography specialists. He learns to harness the power of encrypted messaging apps, digital currencies, and blockchain technologies. His protégés become adept at operating in this new terrain, building virtual networks that mirror the physical ones he created decades earlier. He invests in startups focused on cybersecurity and digital identity verification, fields that offer both profit and protection. And though the tools change, his philosophy remains the same. Move quietly, remain invisible, and let your influence ripple outward without drawing direct attention. Mainstream historical fact. Organized crime groups worldwide have increasingly leveraged technology for money laundering, communication, and expanding their reach in the 21st century, often adapting quickly to law enforcement tactics. Peter's network exemplifies this evolution, combining old world wisdom with new world technology. In this era, his power is measured not by physical presence, but by the control of information flows, the management of perception, and the orchestration of influence behind digital screens. He becomes a master of the unseen, the architect of systems that operate beyond borders, laws, and detection. Even as governments increase surveillance capabilities and regulatory frameworks, Peter's operations continue to outpace them. His name is rarely spoken aloud. His face is almost never seen. But his shadow stretches across continents, industries, and institutions, and in a world flooded with noise, his silence speaks volumes. By the mid-2000s, Peter Chong's reach has extended into new arenas: finance, technology, real estate, and political consulting. The man who once ruled back alleys now influences boardrooms and policy discussions across Asia and North America. Despite his low profile, he becomes a sought-after advisor for business leaders navigating the complexities of transnational investments and regulatory environments. His understanding of cultural nuances and legal gray areas makes him invaluable. In private meetings, he listens more than he speaks, weighing words carefully before offering guidance that shapes decisions with far-reaching consequences. Mainstream historical fact. During this period, global financial markets became increasingly interconnected, and cross-border investments surged, often accompanied by intricate legal structures and offshore entities that complicated regulatory oversight. Peter's enterprises benefit from this complexity, operating in spaces where legality and morality blur. Though not publicly acknowledged, he influences policy dialogues on trade, immigration, and regional cooperation through proxies and informal channels. Within Chinatown, his legacy is felt, but rarely discussed openly. New generations grow up unaware of the man who shaped much of their community's modern structure. Yet, for those who know, Peter remains a figure of respect, mystery, and caution. He is the embodiment of quiet power, forever in the background, shaping outcomes with a calm hand. As the years turn into decades, Peter Chong's story fades from headlines, but not from the currents of influence he set in motion. He becomes a figure of legend, spoken of in hushed tones among those who understand the true nature of power. His empire, once rooted in the narrow streets of Chinatown, has blossomed into a vast network spanning continents and industries. His protégés carry his legacy forward, adapting to new challenges, but always guided by the principles he instilled: discretion, patience, and subtlety. Peter himself retreats further into the background. Public appearances are rare, communications even rarer. His presence is felt more than seen, a whisper in the corridors of power. The FBI's pursuit, once fervent, has become a distant memory. The files remain open, but are now more historical records than active investigations. In the quiet moments, Peter reflects on a life shaped by shadows and strategy, a life where silence was both a weapon and a shield. He understands that true power lies not in conquest, but in control, the ability to shape outcomes without ever being fully seen. And so, as the sun sets over the cities he touched, Peter Chong remains a testament to the art of invisible influence, a man who mastered the delicate balance between presence and absence, legacy and anonymity, and in that mastery found a kind of immortality. Let's slow down now and let the noise of the world fade into the background. Picture the calm streets of Chinatown at night, the soft glow of lanterns casting gentle shadows, the faint murmur of distant conversations, and the subtle rustle of leaves carried by a cool breeze. Somewhere far away, waves lap quietly against the harbor, and the city breathes in a steady rhythm. Peter Chong's story isn't just one of power and influence. It's a testament to patience, silence, and the unseen forces that shape our lives. He became more than a man. He became a pattern, a presence felt in the spaces between words, in the quiet corners of back rooms, and in the lives of those who walk the same streets. As you close your eyes, imagine the gentle unfolding of time, the soft cadence of footsteps disappearing into the night, and the peaceful certainty that even the most complex webs eventually settle into stillness. Thank you for staying with me on this journey through shadows and silence. Let yourself drift now, knowing the world turns quietly, and your own story is safe in the calm. Sleep well, and until next time, rest easy.